First of all, or what we're going to do first of all, is look ahead to 2020. So if I can invite my panel to come up for this session, that would be great, please. Now, this is a session that's going to be live streamed, so hello to our audience at home. I hope you'll have a lovely time. You in the audience, or indeed our live web streamed audience, you can tweet about what you're going to hear over the next 45 minutes or so. So hashtag PLSA Annual 19. And I'd like you lot to start thinking about the questions you're going to ask of this panel. What we're going to do over the next 15 minutes is each of the panel is going to give us a 5-minute talk about what they think should be coming up in 2020. And then we're going to have a discussion about that. So it would be great if you can help inform that discussion. I'm going to be picking those up through the app. But if anybody wants to stick their hand up in the air, we've got a couple of roving mics around, and I'll give you the opportunity to join in as well. Everyone happy with that? Brilliant. Everyone happy with that? Yes, good, okay. So I'm hoping that my panel needs no introduction, but I'll introduce them anyway. Helen Dean, who's Chief Executive of Nest Corporation. Bill Galvin, he's the obvious one to spot in the middle, Chief Executive of USS. And then Margaret Snowdon, OBE, who's President of PLSA. And we're going to start off with, I think we're going to start off with Helen.
Thank you. Hello, everybody, and thank you for inviting me here. Looking ahead, I think we should always start by understanding our members and thinking about what our members want and need. So I'd like to introduce you to Sarah. Sarah is a typical Nest member. She's young. She's Generation Rent. She is sharing a flat with her boyfriend, James. She wants to have kids in the future. And she really cares about the climate. She worries about the world that her kids are going to grow up in. Her rent is high. It's taking up about 1/3 of her income. And that income comes from 2 jobs, one of which is a job in a department store, her main job, for which she earns about £18,000 a year. And she also supplements that by working at the weekends for a local pub. Sarah's struggling to make ends meet. She's got a student loan that she has to service, and she's also got another loan that she took out when she got the flat to pay the deposit. She's got no liquid savings at all, not a penny in terms of a rainy day fund, and she worries about that and she stresses about that. She tries to save, but she finds it hard. She says it's just money in and money out. Never gets the chance to save. She was auto-enrolled by the department store into her pension. She's really pleased about that. She thinks it's great. Why does she think it's great? Because it's something she doesn't have to worry about. Oh, great, I can tick that off my worry list and not think about it. She is not engaged in her pension. So what does that story tell us about what we need to do in the future? Well, Sarah's only been auto-enrolled into one of her jobs. And like many lower earners, particularly women, Sarah is losing out. She's losing out the opportunity to save, and she's losing out on her employer contributions. So because of the earnings trigger, many jobs don't qualify for auto-enrollment in the first place, and because of the lower earnings limit, for lower earners, disproportionately much of their earnings don't attract the employer contribution either. Sarah is also very vulnerable to income and expenditure shocks. And when her fridge breaks down or her washing machine goes, she's only really got 2 choices. She's either going to take out another loan or she's going to stop saving in her pension. She's vulnerable to poor persistency, and that will create very bad outcomes. So I think we need to ask ourselves, when Sarah gets another few quid that she can spend, that she can save, should she save it in a pension or should she create that rainy day fund? Sarah's an inertia saver. She's not engaged. She needs to engage. At some stage, she's going to need to think about whether she's saving enough. What are her retirement goals? She needs to keep track of her pensions. She's going to have to make choices in retirement. We need to think how we are going to really get Sarah to engage with her pensions. Maybe her interest in the climate and responsible investment might be a good hook for that. Now let's fast forward. Many years. Sarah and James got married. Great news. They had 3 children. Sarah has had 7 jobs over her lifetime, including quite a long stint of being self-employed. She didn't save in that period. She now is thinking that she may want to stop work because she wants to look after her grandchildren, help out the kids. Now, if nothing changes, this is going to be a difficult time for Sarah. She's accumulated a large number of pensions. She's lost track of them. She never did engage. She doesn't quite know where they are. She's moved. She didn't tell the pension funds where she was. She's got a job to do to reconnect with her pensions. When she does, she's quite disappointed. The amount of pension savings she's managed to accumulate is really a lot less than that which her husband James has accumulated, partly because she's earned less than James, partly because in that period of self-employment, she never saved. She wanted to, she meant to, she never quite got round to it. That's making her feel quite vulnerable and quite dependent on her husband in a way she never has in the past. Now, Sarah wants to turn the income that she has managed to generate, the pension that she has managed to generate, into a steady, dependable income. She hasn't got a clue how to do that. She's finding the prospect of financial advice unaffordable and, to be honest, a bit frightening. She's a bit embarrassed to talk about this stuff. So Sarah's coming to the conclusion that maybe she'll just take it all out and stick it in the bank. Maybe then she can keep her eye on it, and maybe she can bung the kids a few quid and help them out as well. So Sarah is not an edge case. She's typical of Nest members. What does this tell us? Well, it tells us that automatic enrolment has been a great thing. It's got people saving, it's popular, and it's a great foundation to build on. But having built the foundations, we now need to build the house. There is a lot to do. We need a better deal for women. Self-employed people, well, they need a nudge into saving. We need to balance long and short-term savings to get that balance right for people. We need to get better information out there, better engagement, goal setting of the kind that PLSA have been talking about, engagement with a purpose. We need scalable, affordable solutions to freedom and choice for people like Sarah that make sense to her. Maybe it's time for a new pension settlement, and maybe 2020 is the year to do that. Maybe a new pensions commission and a new consensus for the 2020s.
Brilliant. Thank you, Helen. Yeah, I can give her a round of applause. Bill.
Thank you, Richard. So I want to reflect for a little bit on something that I think will be fundamentally important for people like Sarah starting now. And that's the issues of the type of industry we're creating and building. Because the changing structure of the pensions industry, I think, provides a fundamentally important moment for us and a massive opportunity. An opportunity to shape the industry that we're in now for generations and have a profound effect on the outcomes of members like Sarah. Industry structure, I believe, is one of the most important factors in determining consumer outcomes in any sector. It drives where value accumulates in the industry value chain, and this drives incentives, which drives culture, which drives behaviours. And for the UK, automatic enrolment has been a game changer. Changed the economics of distribution, and then fundamentally changed the supply side, and prompted regulatory interventions that drives these changes even harder. So we see now the UK traversing similar ground to Australia, post-automatic enrolment, similar drivers to the Netherlands. Both of these countries rank at the top of the Mercer-Melbourne Global Index of pension systems. But what have we seen there? We've seen in the Netherlands 1,000 schemes, over 1,000 schemes 20 years ago, now 240 schemes. And in Australia, 7,000 schemes in 2006, now about 500. And consolidation's still going on. We see, just announced this week, that the First State Super and Vic Super deciding that they need to have 120 billion Australian dollars or so as the basis for their proposition. The UK is clearly on this journey, and this conference is clearly going to talk about these themes. And we know The UK has started from a very different place, a fragmented space, 6,000 DB schemes of 50,000 DC schemes, primarily focused on the employers as the key structure around which the industry coalesced. And when the CMA looked at this, they came to the conclusion that it's led to a very weak demand side from both the employer perspective and the member perspective. And so the industry structures that emerge from that, we see the concentrations existing in asset managers, service providers, asset managers, administrators. We can see that, the amount of institutional money in the top 3 asset managers, the concentration of service providers and administrators. And we've seen the way the margins and the value in the chain has followed that. But it's quite clear that the future will be radically different, because where are assets accumulating now? The ONS tells us in private sector occupational pension schemes, there are 1.1 million actives in DB and 10 million in DC. And the PPI believes that if we roll that forward to 2039, we'll have 14.2 million actives in DC, of which 10 million will be in master trust arrangements. And if we look at the 2 million people in local government schemes and the consolidation that's going on there, we can see the drivers that are going to get us to this place. So what will the industry look like at that point in time? Clearly fewer providers. There are 40 master trusts going through the regulatory picture now. There are 6 local government consolidation vehicles. We see what's happening maybe to the closed DB schemes and the legacy runoff vehicles that are looking to whether specialist insurers or super funds play in that space. I think it will have a profound impact on the industry, the way these things develop. We can imagine a world in which these scale institutions, with a very short arm to the member, use their market power to drive member outcomes. You can see a world in which there's a constant focus on driving down member charges, delivering value for money, looking across the full value chain, ensuring full accountability, scale to invest in member decision support so that people like Sarah get what they need in terms of the decisions that they required, competing for investment opportunities in a way that makes the pie bigger by insisting on higher standards in investee companies. So we can see how scale can support the type of outcomes that we want for this industry. And we can see why this is an exciting time and a huge opportunity from the industry. I think there are people in this room now who are building these institutions and regulating those institutions, and that's a huge responsibility, because we must build organizations that are up to the future challenge. Not just focused on today, and that's quite difficult because many of these organizations are not starting off at the scale that it might eventually be. Was to learn the past failures in the financial services industry in particular as it has consolidated, and learn from where things have gone well and badly in other consolidation regimes like Australia and the Netherlands. We have to make sure that the industry layer does not become a rent extractor. But nevertheless, we can't make false economies so that talented people are not attracted to work in it or feel underappreciated. We have to develop cultures in these organizations that can lead the industry, people who are here for the right reasons, capable and committed, cultures that value the short arm to the member, that arm that can whack you as well as caress you from time to time. But as these organizations gradually reach scale, we're seeing huge numbers of people moving from the old industry structures into new. Lots of people moving into in-house organizations in investments, in particularly with, I guess, the highest profile, but also in actuarial, in legal, in all of the support structures. And in my view, these are privileged roles. They'll set the tone for our industry right into the future. And an industry that can offer these people career paths, fulfilling tasks, huge accountability, and lots of regulatory scrutiny is a potential game changer. So my appeal to us all as an industry, but particularly the people who are building these organisations, that to my mind will be the industry of the future, is let's get the DNA of these organisations right from the start. Let's seed the DNA into these organisations, because if you look at other industries, if you look at other systems, it's the DNA of these significant financial institutions who will be the future of this pensions industry that will set the tone and culture of the whole pensions industry. And some of the decisions we make now, I think about the people that we hire, the decisions about what we insource and outsource, the umbrella over which that we conceive for these organisations, that will have a big difference in the outcomes that people like Sarah will see in 20 or 30 and 40 years' time.
Thank you, Bill. Margaret.
Thank you, Richard. I was asked what I was thinking about for 2020, and when I had the briefing meeting with Richard, I think I had about 50 things on the agenda, and he said, you've only got 5 minutes. So that curtailed my thinking. But I'm thinking about a lot of things, and I'm thinking a lot of immediate things, and I'm thinking also about a lot of elephants. Might sound a bit odd, but I'll explain. Firstly, and naturally, I think about administration, and I'm really pleased to see a lot of progress being made by admin to improve member service, to improve their efficiency. But it's very hard to do that when funds are constrained. We don't put enough investment into that, nowhere near. And I do see administrators continuing to use technology and using things like biometrics to try and make life easier for member identification. I see automation happening, and more commonly using things like robotics to replace some human processes. AI is coming, but it's coming very, very slowly. I see an increase in the use of portals, and it's portals that seem to be used more for self-information than for self-service. But I do welcome the move towards portals which are for financial well-being, because I think we need to recognise that this isn't just about pensions, it's about people's lives and how they support themselves in later life. I said efficiency, and we're nowhere near as efficient as we need to be. We can paint sunny uplands, but really we're probably 30% behind a lot of the market, and I mean the market out there, not the market within our little niche. We are 30% less efficient. That means we charge more, we spend more than we need to, and I think we need to address that. But I'll come to the elephants. The one big elephant that remains in the room is data. And everybody talks about it, and everybody yawns and thinks, well, data's done. We've been through data. We've got common standards. We've got conditional standards. It's all hunky-dory, but actually it's not. Data's simply not good enough. And some people actually fib about the state of their data quality, and others don't actually know what their data quality is. I don't think the data that we use is good enough for good pensions administration, and I don't think it's good enough for dashboards either. And I think we've lived far too long agonising over whose fault it is. I think we do need to go on and sort it. And a quick rule of thumb when I was looking at this, I think we need to spend about 25 million within a 4-year period on data to get it up to scratch. Now that's quite a lot. Where is that going to come from? Well, maybe we can discuss that later on. But what will we see in 2020? I do think we'll see some big strides in data, either by using a carrot, which I would quite like to be able to do, and the alternative, though, is a big stick. And I think you'll have seen the regulators already coming out with a bit of a stick and a warning for people, giving them time to get their house in order if they haven't even reviewed the data. But having said all that, we do need to have the right skills to be able to do some of this. But 2020, I think, will be exciting. I can't stand on a platform or sit on a platform and not mention scams. I do a lot of thinking about scams protection because I believe it's better to get the protection in before it goes out to a scam, as you never ever get it back. And I think the group that I work with in the code has saved about £250 million from getting into scammers' hands. Now, that's a good thing, but it really is the tip of the iceberg. And if you think last year, £60 billion worth of transfer values were requested. That's a lot of transfer requests. And about 34 billion, according to Royal London, 34 billion actually transferred out from DB schemes, covering about 210,000 people. That's a lot. And of that amount, research has shown that probably 1.5 billion has probably gone to a dodgy arrangement or a scam. That's scary stuff, and we need to do something to stop that. We see the average size of a scam is perhaps around 82,000. I think that's a bit light. But on that measure, 18,000 people have been impacted by a scam. That's outrageous. And the next big thing is the rise of claims management firms who see a great opportunity in trying to get something back for all those thousands of people who've transferred out when perhaps they ought not to have done that. And I'll tell you now, but schemes that don't do due diligence are going to find themselves in a real sticky place when those claims management companies come back to claim some money. So there are really two elephants, back to elephants again, there are two elephants in the room with scams. And the first one is the real conflict that exists between the statutory right to transfer and the duty of care to protect members from harm. Now, the Pensions Bill seems to have something in it about limiting the statutory right to transfer. It's a step in the right direction, but it's very small beer. It really is not a silver bullet. And the other thing is the legal barrier that exists to sharing intelligence. We're all scared to talk about scammers. We're all scared to share that information with one another in case we get sued. And actually, the likelihood is quite high. So we're up against it in trying to protect people from scams. But I think 2020 will see some of those elephants and put a little bit to bed. And finally, transfers. I've mentioned the scale of transfers. That means it's so important we get it right. They're really big business. And if you think 2% of DB assets are leaving the schemes every year, that's like de-risking through the back door. We really do need to pay attention to it. And transfers are difficult, and they're difficult often because they're at risk of some poor advice. They take too long to process, and that leads to complaints. There's been a lot of work to try and address both of those things this year, with the PFS working in harmony with the rest of the industry to produce a code on ethical advisors so that members have somewhere to go where they won't be ripped off. And also PASA with its DB transfer guidance covering straightforward transfers. And in 2020, there'll be a new PASA code on DB transfers that will cover all transfers apart from a very few exceptions, and we're targeting 10 days to settle transfers. But I have to say the elephant here is that we think speed is everything. There's a lot of commentary about speed. Everything must be done very quickly. And one thing I'll say is a fast transfer isn't necessarily improving a bad transfer. It's just making a bad transfer happen a lot sooner. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Right, well, there's an awful lot of material there. I was starting to think that next year might be a little bit quieter. Doesn't sound like it's going to be. So please, you start thinking about your questions. I've already had some over the app. If you've got a question, stick your hand in the air and one of the mics will come over to you, and we'll go to that in a moment. But before we do, I'm going to actually open with one of the questions that's been submitted through the app. Julian talked about one of our 4 policy objectives being adequate contributions. And we do have a tension between affordability and adequacy. So the question that's come in is, how would Sarah cope with a 4% increase in pension contributions and 4% less in pay? How are we going to resolve that tension, do you think?
Do you want me to start?
Why not, Helen?
So I do think in the fullness of time we need people to contribute more into a pension, but I do think we should move forward on this very carefully. First set of phasing that we experienced was very benign. I mean, hardly any impact at all. Second time, when we went to 8%, it was still fine, but there was more of an impact. There is a risk that we will get to the point where we disturb the inertia and people will just cease contributing if we're not careful. We have to remain affordable. The other thing about Sarah is, as I said, the big problem, the immediate problem that Sarah's got is that she doesn't have any liquid savings. She doesn't have an emergency fund. And that's why one of the things that we've been looking at Nest is looking at the idea of having a sidecar savings vehicle alongside the pension. So I think our hypothesis, which yet to be proved in my testing, is maybe it would be better for Sarah to put the next few pounds into a liquid savings vehicle, allow that to increase until she actually achieves a buffer, and then and only then should the money tip into the pension. And that way we bring together long-term and short-term pension saving. As I said, Sarah is stressed and worried about her financial position. That has quite a big impact potentially on her ability to work well in her employment. In America, in Harvard University, where they've experimented with this kind of thing, they've found it's good for the individual. A sidecar savings vehicle is good for the individual. It's good for the employer because you get workers who are more focused, less worried about money, less likely to take time off sick. But also it's good for the pension. They actually found more money went into the pension overall because of this persistency problem. That problem that many people will stop saving in a pension because it's their only recourse when they get into financial difficulty starts to go away.
So financial sustainability is vital.
Vital.
Bill, Margaret, do you want to add to that?
Well, I preface this by saying that, that in my current day job, most of the people that we serve are not in that bracket, but there's a general principle here that I think that the cost of provision for retirement has gone up. The cost of providing some guaranteed provision has gone up very substantially. There are two things that must go hand in hand, I think, regardless of the nature of the pension or where the individual might be in their journey to income bracket. One is education so that people have an understanding of what to get, and the other is flexibility so that people can manage through changes in circumstances and changes in their position. If we can get the proposition right such that those things come together, we won't solve all problems, but I think those principles could be applied to assist most people on their journey.
I would endorse what's been said. I do like the idea of flexibility. I think we make it hard for people to save sometimes by insisting that they save X% every week or every month without fail. Life isn't like that. People have expenses they've got to pay out, and a little bit more flexibility that would allow them to sort of increase or decrease contributions as they go through life, I think would be favourable. And that's why I quite like the sidecar idea, simply because it does allow something to be done in a sort of ad hoc, more spontaneous basis. But I think we need our systems to be a lot more flexible to cater to what I think members would actually do and what they could be encouraged to do.
And I think I'd also throw in context. Members have no context of the trade-off between what they're spending and what they're saving because they've no idea how much money they need to save.
Yeah.
And the idea behind the retirement living standards is that they can start to visualise themselves in the future and then start to make an informed decision about, well, do I spend now, do I spend in the future? And it is going to be tough for those who are low earners, but although it's going to be tough, they're still going to have tough decisions to make.
There's something important, isn't there, about giving people goals,
Yeah.
setting goals, and it's very hard for people to do that for themselves. It's really hard to know what good looks like. So helping people with those goals feels to me to be absolutely the right way forward. I do think, however, we need to think about those long-term goals and can we bring them forward for people? I think goals are more meaningful if you can look at them over what do I need to do this year and next year and get a sense of achievement. So I think what we now need to do is think about those long-term goals and think about how we can actually turn them into things that people can manage against as they go through their retirement journey.
Any thoughts on what those short-term goals could be?
Well, there's quite a bit of academic research being done looking at this sort of stuff. How can you translate a long-term goal into a short-term goal for someone? Should you talk about you need to save this amount of money this year, or is it better to say you've saved a year, you've bought a year of retirement? What's the best currency to actually talk to people about this sort of stuff? my view is it's all very well for us to guess. We're all passionate about pensions. We all know a lot about pensions. And we might think we know the answer. Actually, I think what we need to understand is what works in practice. Actually trying different things with cohorts of members and doing proper A/B testing and seeing what works is very, very powerful.
Goes back to your point about remembering the member and seeing it through their eyes.
Yeah.
Anything to add to that? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next area of questioning. Okay, did anybody stick their hand up, by the way? I was looking away. There's one down the front here, if the microphone's coming down. It's just down the front here, Okay, it's going to be microphone number one. If you could tell us who you are, please.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, panel. Very interesting discussion. I wanted to pick up on one of Margaret's comments. I'm absolutely with you that we need to improve member data. I do welcome the initiative from the pensions regulator in terms of them targeting pension schemes and setting standards. I was slightly bemused by the fact that they seem to have dropped their sort of targets for member data, which I'm not quite clear in terms of why they've done that. And the other issue around PEMS data is, I think, what enough has been talked about is the security of data from cyber attack and from fraud. There's so much sort of personal information maintained at the pensions administrators that they need to make sure their security systems, I would argue, are as good as the banks in terms of making sure cyber criminals can't access that pensions data.
Okay. Sorry, was it Andrew, is it?
Andrew.
Andrew, hello, Andrew. Margaret, that sounds like one for you.
I'll pick that at the top. I agree. I mean, it is actually quite important that I think the regulator is targeting because we've been trying for 10 years to get data cleaned up by inviting people nicely to clean their data and trusting that they will do. I think there's sort of increasing views that people, as I said, don't even seem to know whether their data is good enough or not. I think one of the issues, though, it's quite nebulous to say you should have all your common data up to date, you should have your conditional data up to date, and people, if they don't really understand what that means, it's difficult to prove or to know that you've actually arrived where you need to be. And I think and I've certainly proposed that what we do is we target data for a real purpose. And for example, if we're talking about data being needed for dashboard, we can say what we would like it to be able to do, what we would like the dashboard to be able to do with data, or people around the dashboard to do with data. And I think that puts a whole different complexion on the data that you keep. So I'm very hopeful that when the dashboard group gets properly going, it will actually address some of those issues, and it will be really quite clear that if you want to contribute to the dashboard, this is the kind of data you need, and it will be less vague, I think, than we might have seen it before. You asked about security. It is one thing, and I was probably a little bit remiss in not mentioning it, but it's one thing I hear constantly when I talk to administrators. It's this great concern about cyber security. And I think the fact that there's so much more awareness of it now, a couple of years ago, if you'd asked about it, it was maybe thought, well, the big guys are going to get hit, I'm going to be okay. I think there's now more realisation that it is across the piece, and I see more activity in cyber protection, and ironically, cyber protection is something that people are prepared to pay for, whereas good, solid administration is a little bit more of a challenge.
Do you see an increase in risk in cyber next year? Do you think it's going to happen?
I think it's already happening, actually. People don't broadcast when they've had phishing attacks or whatever. You don't really hear of that. But there has been a number of examples where schemes have had denial of their systems because of cyber attacks. And if you think of the amount of money that sits in pensions, it's a huge amount of money. That is really, really attractive. And what we in this country don't realise as well is our data is very valuable. And I think, to be honest, I think we need a different mindset where we actually see that our data is ours and it does actually have a monetary value. And I think if we thought of that, we would be less willing to give it away, and we'd probably be more interested in what our administrators are doing with that data. But it's very valuable, therefore scammers want to get hold of it. Cyber thieves want to be able to get hold of it because you can sell it for quite a lot of money per line of data.
Yeah.
Whenever my IT team want to scare me, they call me into a room and show me the reports of all the things that they've blocked from coming into our systems. And you know, we're not particularly a high-profile organisation from a brand perspective or anything like that. But when you see this and you see the sources of all of this, it is quite sobering, really, and heightens the importance of some of the things I was speaking about earlier. This data needs to be held in organisations that can run it properly and secure it and manage it and understand the responsibilities in that space. And of course, pensions is at its core a data business. You know, if in some ideal world, if employers gave you perfect data and members engaged with you online, you wouldn't need anything else in between apart from an algorithm. Now, we're never going to get there, right? Because employers can't give you perfect data, and the world of pensions is too complex to capture for absolutely everybody in an algorithm. But the data is the fundamental thing to getting everything else right, including all the digital aspirations we all have.
I completely agree on data security and on data quality. On data security, we hold data on 8 million members, and Margaret's right, the data itself has a street value, a considerable street value. So the responsibility is on us to hold that information safe and secure for our members, and it's something all of us have to take really, really seriously. Benchmarking, as you say, against the best examples in the financial services sector to make sure that we're as protected as we possibly can be, and it is something that is worth spending money on. Completely agree. Data quality, that's something also that is very important and will become more and more important as we start to move into the dashboard. Got to make sure that as we allow people to access multiple pension information through the dashboard, that we are actually making sure that the thing that somebody looks at is actually their records and not somebody else's. I mean, at Nest, we're quite lucky. We're a young scheme. There's an ageing thing about data, and we haven't experienced that much yet because we're still quite young. And we do validate data on the way in, but there is a structural issue, I think, for us. Because of the way the automatic enrolment regulations work, automatic enrolment pensions are dependent on the data that is provided to them by the employer. You can't insist on validating it with the member, because to do so would be illegal, because you can't require the member to do anything in order to be in the pension scheme. So validating it and working with the employer is the best that you can do, and the employer's data is sometimes not of the best quality. So I think it's another reason why member engagement is so important. If you go into your online bank, you'll notice one of the first things they do is make you check a box before you do anything to say that your key data is still correct. Is it up to date? Is this your address? Have you changed your email address? That's the sort of thing I think that we need to get to do with our members. But to do that, we need to engage them, and we need to get them to start using the pension. I think it's going to be a real issue for 2020. If we really are going to make this dashboard work, the most difficult and most important issue we're going to have to crack is data.
Margaret, did you have something?
Just going to make a last remark on it. One of the biggest risk factors in cyber isn't the technology and it isn't the data itself, it's actually the people who run it. The human factor is the biggest single risk, and people always try to be helpful, and it would surprise you how many phishing attacks are actually successful, and it's because people want to respond quickly and they want to help. But it lays a whole organisation open to cyber threat. So if you can sort the people bit and make sure that people understand the responsibilities, then you'll go a long way to protecting against hackers.
Okay. One of the questions that's come in over the app, and we've mentioned it already a couple of times, Pensions Dashboard, is 2020 the year it's finally going to happen?
Ooh.
Simple yes or no will do.
I think I'm going to be bold here and say I think not. I think we'll make a lot of progress towards it.
Chris, are you in the room?
I would be surprised if we can deliver the dashboard in such a short period of time. But that's not to say we won't make some great strides forward, and it's not to say that it's not a very important initiative and a prize worth having. It's worth having, it's worth doing properly. These issues to do with data, You know, they're really fundamental, and we're all going to have to think about how we clean up our data and standardise the way we use it so that we can identify the right people. So I think we shouldn't expect it, and we shouldn't put pressure on the dashboard team to deliver this too quickly. And we shouldn't be too quick to say it's a problem if it doesn't deliver really quickly, because it's important and let's get it right.
Yeah, no, I think that's very sensible.
My impression is for very good reasons, we've gone for a reasonably complex model of implementation of the dashboard, and I think there will be challenges in terms of getting from where we are now to the ultimate vision that everybody has for members' access to that information, which won't be just around the provision of data in standardized formats by schemes and organizations to the dashboards, but in terms of how the various structures and uses that are put on that will emerge. And so I think there will be a fairly lengthy implementation period for the dashboard, and some things that will still be critical success factors to how it's rolled out, particularly in terms of the nature of the organisations that host this material.
Yeah. Margaret, before we come to you, is there anybody from the new steering group in here, or indeed is Chris here? Because it'd be great to get a feedback from Chris, Gary. No, nobody here? Okay. Margaret.
Yeah, I agree. I'd love to see the dashboard come in, or the dashboards come in 2020, but I think given everything else we've got getting in the way, it's going to be exceedingly difficult to get that. But I think we will see progress. I mean, I would like to see progress on the legislative front to start with, but that would be quite encouraging. But it does take time to get these things done, and they've got to be done right. If it's not right, it will be a complete disaster. So it does need to be done right, and I think we have to accept it's going to take a bit longer. I did in my remarks say that I thought we had 4 years to get our data up and running. That wasn't a side, sort of allusion to how long it was going to take for dashboard. But 2020, I don't think so. But we'll see the beginnings of possibly another pilot or something showing that certain things work.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Let's just change direction slightly. Bill, you talked about changing the DNA of financial institutions. This is the last 3.5 minutes. Let's set an aspirational direction that can start during 2020. What did you mean by that? What have we got to change? What in our DNA has got to change? So industries that have consolidated, I think, are probably quite different things from the way this industry is now. And we see what's happened in Australia. There's quite an interesting division between mutual organisations and retail organisations in the provision of superannuation funds, and quite different dynamics in terms of how those organisations play out, what they charge, and some of the things that have gone wrong have worked their way out differently in those different types of structures. We've seen what's happened as the banking industry has consolidated and the various different iterations of that. If we believe the pensions industry is going to consolidate, and I believe it is, and I believe that in 30 years' time we'll be talking about many fewer scale institutions doing very different things, how can we make sure that the member interest is to the fore, that these haven't become rent extractors, as some of the Australian funds have been accused of, and that the ethos of the organisations maintain the member at the front of the organisation, because with increasing market power, which these organisations will have, comes increasing responsibility. And at the moment, I think you could say, the trustee part of our industry very often says, well, we'd love to get these things done, but we don't have the market power, we're too fragmented. Well, it's coming, and it's got to be used well and properly, I think. Okay. Helen?
I agree, put the member first. The best pension funds in the future are going to be the ones that really understand their members, really understand what their mandate is and put them first, become more efficient, ever improve their service. I think for me, though, one of the really exciting things for the future in that world is thinking about how concerned people are about responsible investment and climate change, and thinking about the power of pensions and the opportunity for all of us as institutional investors to really take that mandate and drive real change on behalf of our members by investing wisely and responsibly and really, making the money work. I think that's what our members want of us. I think that will really deliver on the kinds of mandates that our members are likely to give us in the future, and could make the whole industry a real source for good.
Okay, Margaret?
Very quickly, I think one of the things we need to do is we need to help restore trust, because people have grown up to not trust pensions, which is a real shame because the vast majority of people are absolutely, first and foremost, trying to do absolutely the best for members, but putting members first is one way to start building those bridges, I think.
And if I could just follow, one of the interesting things for the UK, I think, will be the role of capital in particularly the master trust segment, because there's a very different range of institutions in there, some of which you classify more in the mutual end, and some of which are much more commercially driven. Now, any industry needs capital to develop and invest, but obviously over shorter time periods than members have horizons, and with different incentives for the people running those institutions, that can drive behaviours that might not always be in members' interests. We've got to get that right, and the development of our version of the master trust regime, where, as I've said earlier, most people, it looks like, are going to end up, is going to have to reflect how we balance those dynamics.
So again, remembering the member, building from the bottom, not the top. I'm afraid we're out of time, sorry. We had over 30 questions submitted through the app there, so I'm terribly sorry if we didn't get to your questions. I did try to cover, well, what was an awful lot of ground. We tried to cover what was an awful lot of ground in a very short period of time. I'll throw in just one statistic, actually, just to back up one of the points Margaret made. £34 billion in transfers out. Somebody told me that this year we're on target for about 30 to 40 billion pounds worth of buyouts from DB schemes. So transfers out, yeah, de-risking by the back door. Amazing. So we're now going to go into a break. Before you rush off, please pick up the conference app. And if you could rate this session, and if you could rate Julian's session as well, that would be absolutely fantastic. During the break, you can go to the Learning Hub and hear about ESG and stewardship. And then after the break, we're going to be coming back to hear the CEO of L&G, Nigel Wilson, and the BBC's Steph McGovern. Thank you very much.